Is your chain tighter than a rubber band? It probably shouldn't be. Now here's a perfect example of a chain that's ready to come off and blow a hole right through your cases. Chain tension is actually pretty critical. Believe it or not, too tight of a chain will affect the handling of your bike. It'll be binding up the rear suspension, and of course it's going to be wearing out your chain and sprockets that much quicker. And too loose of a chain, it could come off and it'll cause a whole nother set of problems. With chain and sprockets being one of the quickest items to wear on a bike, you'll definitely want to make sure you're on point with this stuff. First things first, we're going to loosen up the rear axle nut here. This is going to be a 32 on most bikes, and they're torqued pretty tight, so you might need a breaker bar to bust this guy loose. You just need to get to the point where it's finger tight. Now we're going to loosen up the lock nut on either side. This enables us to thread the bolt in or out depending if we need to loosen or tighten the chain. So threading it out brings the wheel back and thus tightens the chain. Threading it in does the opposite. You want to adjust both bolts evenly so that way the rear wheel stays aligned here. Thread your adjuster bolts in or out until you have about 3 fingers worth of tension here at the chain slider. This is about in the center of the swing arm. This is always the rule of thumb I go by. If you prefer to measure the chain slack with a ruler, the spec is 25 to 35 millimeters or about inch to inch and a quarter. One thing I want to mention here when you're adjusting your bolts, make sure your blocks are all the way up against the bolts here. If there's a gap there, you'll get a false reading on your chain tension. Once your chain tension is set, let's tighten up the lock nut. Like I mentioned before, the wheel has to stay aligned, and I make sure of this by using a ruler, measuring from the axle block to the back of the swing arm. So make sure it's the same distance on either side. Once you're finished up with that, I like to put a rag in between the chain and the sprocket to pull the wheel all the way forward. And now we can tighten the axle. Now let's tighten the axle nut to the correct spec. On the Hondas, it's 94 foot-pounds. And that'll do it. It's always a good idea to inspect your chain and sprockets. Here's the difference between a good one and a bad one. You can see obviously the worn one, the teeth are bent forward and the tip of the tooth is worn down quite a bit. Next we're going to inspect the chain. Here is a really badly worn chain. You definitely don't want your chain looking like this, and here's a chain that has very little wear. You're always going to have some side to side slop here, but definitely nothing like this one. While we're at it, we're going to check out the chain sliders and chain roller as well. So take a look, make sure your chain slider isn't worn all the way through here. And your chain roller, make sure there's no up and down movement. There's also one up underneath here as well. Check that too. Your chain guide has a slider in it as well. What we're looking for here is making sure there's enough material left in the block. So this one has quite a bit left. You definitely don't want it wearing all the way through and through your chain slider or your chain guide. One last thing to check here is the front of the chain slider. Underneath, I see it quite often, the chain will actually wear through the slider into the swing arm and into the pivot bearing. And at that point, the swing arm's shot and needs to be replaced. I appreciate you checking out the video. Hopefully you learned something. If you got any questions, feel free to put them below. I'll try my best to get to them. I'll see you guys next week where I'll have another video.